You are listening to Viewpoints from PlaceCloud. Cultural researchers tell stories of places from around the world. For the full multimedia experience and to support the creators you enjoy, visit placecloud.io.
In March 1852, Charles Dickens brought Dinosaurs to London in Bleak House. Implacable November weather, as much mud in the streets as if the waters had but newly retired from the face of the earth, and it would not be wonderful to meet a megalosaurus, 40 feet long or so, waddling like an elephantine lizard up Holborn Hill. A matter of months later, the sculptor Benjamin Waterhouse Hawkins started to make this literary vision a reality. Between 1852 and 1855, he built the Crystal Palace Dinosaurs, a series of sculptures representing animals from a 250 million year time span. They were commissioned to draw visitors to Crystal Palace Park, the new location of the gigantic plate glass building that formerly housed the Great Exhibition in 1851. The dinosaurs are wonderfully odd and unique, and were classed as Grade 1 listed buildings in 2007. The sculptor Hawkins worked under the supervision of anatomist Richard Owen to make his creatures as accurate as possible. Owen was a genius who helped found the Natural History Museum. He was such an expert that he was granted first refusal on any animal that died at London Zoo. His wife once returned home to find a dead rhinoceros in their hallway. Owen was also a hateful bully, plagiarist and thief. One biographer describes him as a social experimenter with a penchant for sadism. This isn't just colourful, incidental detail. His cruelty is crucial to understanding how the dinosaurs in front of you were designed. For instance, look on the secondary island for the iguanodons. They are huge, heavy-set creatures. One stands on all fours, hunched, staring straight ahead. The other lolls on its stomach and casually rests its arm on a tree branch. We now know that the iguanodons' horns, shown here on their noses, were actually on their thumbs. More crucially, iguanodons were bipedal. They stood on 2 legs, not 4. These models are often highlighted as an example of how wrong the Victorians were about dinosaur anatomy, but rarely mentioned is that the Victorians did know that the iguanodons were bipedal. Specifically, one Victorian, Gideon Mantell. Mantell had originally discovered and named the iguanodon, an obsession that had cost Mantell his wife, his children, and his medical practice. Owen hated Mantell, and hated Mantell's work. This was partly due to an ideological clash. Owen attempted to fit dinosaurs into Victorian religious orthodoxy, primitive animals created by God for a primitive Earth, and he ridiculed Mantell for even looking for similarities between ancient and modern reptiles. It was also due to Owen's general professional paranoia, which cost many a talented biologist their career. When a freakish carriage accident left Mantell bedbound with a severely damaged spine, Owen renamed the species Mantell had discovered and claimed credit for them. He used his influence at the Royal Society to reject Mantell's papers. In short, Owen purged Mantell from the record. When, in 1852, Mantell was no longer able to bear his pain and committed suicide, Owen anonymously published an obituary in which Mantell was described as a mediocre anatomist with a want of exact knowledge. This obituary even took away from Mantell credit for the iguanodon's discovery and gave it to Owen. Mantell knew that the iguanodons walked on 2 feet. It is impossible to tell whether Owen was ignorant of this fact, or whether Owen was so blinded with hatred that he refused to acknowledge it. The iguanodon, along with being an ideological battleground, was also the site of a bizarre New Year's feast. On New Year's Eve 1853, the sculptor Hawkins invited 21 guests to dine in the iguanodon's stomach. Richard Owen, naturally, sat at the head of the table, which was literally in the dinosaur's head. It is worth noting that a series of banners surrounded the iguanodon, listing the names of noted paleontologists, names including Gideon Mantell. Apparently, once Mantell was dead and no longer posed a threat, Owen was prepared to be a little more gracious. The meal itself was 7 courses, including fish, turkey, ham, pigeon pie, pheasants, woodcocks, French pastries, and meringues, washed down with sherry, Madeira, port, and wine. After several toasts, the merry guests of this socially loaded stomach are reported to have sung a song written for the occasion by Professor Edward Forbes. 1,000 ages underground his skeleton had lain, but now his body's big and round, and there's life in him again. The jolly old beast is not deceased, there's life in him again. Punch magazine commented, "We congratulate the company on the era in which they live, for if it had been an earlier geological period, they might perhaps have occupied the iguanodons inside without having any dinner there." This is unlikely. The iguanodon was a herbivore. The dinosaur exhibits were incomplete, but popular. Visitors constantly assailed Hawkins's workshop, including Queen Victoria and her consort. And when Crystal Palace and its grounds were officially opened in 1854, 40,000 people attended. Hawkins emphasised the educational aspect of the dinosaurs, manufacturing sets of small-scale models sold for £30, but not everyone was convinced. A Punch cartoon shows a screaming child being dragged between the large prehistoric monsters, captioned, "Master Tom strongly objects to having his mind improved." Unfortunately, these successes didn't make up for their extravagant costs, and in 1855, the Crystal Palace Company directors brought Hawkins's work to an end. Hawkins was later invited to New York to create a prehistoric tableau for Central Park. However, he made the mistake of speaking out against Boss Tweed, the corrupt senator with a vice-like grip on the city. One morning in 1871, Hawkins visited his workshop to find that, on orders from Tweed, vandals had smashed his models to pieces and buried them in the park. No trace of them has ever been found. The Crystal Palace dinosaurs are thus Benjamin Waterhouse Hawkins's artistic legacy. History is as much an act of creation as it is an act of uncovering. Reconstruction is still a form of construction. The Crystal Palace dinosaurs have great historical importance. We can see exactly how Victorians imagined dinosaurs. We can understand not only the assumptions and beliefs that underpinned their ideas, but also how far we have come since with the evidence we have available to us, and how we interpret that evidence. However, I think the history of these dinosaurs teaches us a more important lesson. It demonstrates how scientific understanding can be limited just as much by the pettiest, greediest, and most inconsequential corners of human emotion as by technical or scientific knowledge.